Since September 16, 2022, thousands of protesters across the Middle Eastern country of Iran have taken to the streets to demand justice for the death of the Mahsa Amini, who died in the custody of morality police after she was accused of not properly covering her hair. Many have come to see Amini's death as symbolic of the country's heavy-handed response to dissent and people's freedom of expression. According to the New York Times, an article published on September 25, 2022, quotes Henaya Zampana, a spokeswoman for the Kurdistan Freedom Party, who says, "This is not all about the headscarf. The Kurds want freedom." Therefore, today I'm here to talk about the waves of protests in Iran as a result of a strict dissent law and theocratic rules, and to persuade you to understand the importance of protecting the freedom of speech and expression. First, I will look at the ongoing protests in Iran. Secondly, I will identify the primary and secondary causes of these protests. And lastly, I will look at some of the potential solutions that can be applied to safeguard people's freedoms and rights. Let's begin by looking at the issues of protests going on in the country. Iran has been experiencing several waves of protests, in the most recent beginning on September 16, 2022, after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. In a report by the New York Times in an article published September 25, 2022, at least 50 people have been killed and many more injured or arrested. In Kurdish regions, the Henga Human Rights Association and Kurdistan Human Rights states that 17 people were shot dead, including 4 children. In US Today, an article published on September 24, 2022, indicates that Iran has dealt with multiple waves of protests, and the peoples know that this is not an isolated incident. The support for mandatory hijab has been on the decline as protests emerge. Since then, the government has imposed restrictions of national media to limit coverage of the protest. On September 26, 2022, the Financial Express newspaper states that details of casualties were announced slowly due to restriction imposed on communication. Based on these events, we see that a significant problem exists with people's freedom of speech, press, and communication. Next, let us look at some of the underlying factors contributing to these protests. The main causes of protests in Iran, both now and in the past, can be linked to 2 main factors. The first has to be strict dissent law imposed by the government and enforced by both police and the court. In the Asia News Monitor, an article published on December 14, 2022, covered the shocking execution of Ruhollah Zam, a journalist who was accused of operating in the popular news channel that was blamed for the nationwide anti-establishment protests that took place in January 2018. According to the news article, the Supreme Court's decision to go ahead with the execution of the journalist was a blow to Iran's freedom of expression, and it shows the extent to which authorities would go in relation to using brutal tactics to silence people. In relation to the strict dissent law theocratic rule, is Iran also responsible for social activism because they feel and understand the negative impact this has had on people's freedom of expression. In the US Today newspaper, the article published on September 24, 2022, indicates that shortly after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the hijab became mandatory, and morality police were tasked with enforcing that and other restrictions. Women have lived as second-class citizens. Amini's death in the custody of morality police can be symbolically viewed as how harmful theocratic rule is, especially when enforced by such brutality. The citizens understand that the protests are not just about the hijab, but the continued oppression and suppression of people's fundamental freedoms and rights, including freedom of expression and the right to life. Having defined the problem and explained some of the main causes, now we can see what we need to do to resolve the situation. The first step is to understand the problem, its history, and its impact throughout history. This involves analyzing the origins of the issue and trying to address the issue from this point of view. On 26 June 2022, the Journalism Post addressed the dilemma of exercising freedom of expression in the conservative country. In the article, the author, who is a political risk and intelligence analyst, advises the need to address differences, which includes scrutinizing the history using credible information rather than following misleading or misinforming sources. The second solution to this issue is engaging one another and coming together to advocate social change. The Iran protests are one good way of raising the people's voices against tyranny, dictatorship, and oppression. Being allowed to protest is in its way freedom of expression. In the Asian News Monitor, an article published on 26 September 2022 states that protests allow people to voice their needs and speak out against restriction on human freedoms and rights. Lastly, support from other nations and leaders is necessary to show support for people's rights and freedoms in Iran. According to US Today, on September 26, 2022, in the UN General Assembly held on the 21st of the same month, officials from Germany, Sweden, the US, and Chile advocated efforts to end violence against women and support the public stand of freedom and rights. Today, we explore protests in Iran and the main causes of these protests. The government's intolerance, the decency and application of the theocratic rule has limited people's freedom of expression using brutal ways to enforce laws and rules. The main objective here was to pursue us to protect freedom of expression and speech. We have seen that to resolve the issue and protect people's freedom and rights, we need to understand the facts of our history, create an environment that supports social change and people's coming together, including world leaders to promote freedom of speech and expression. Thank you.